Hello everybody, my guest today is Wes Woodell. Wes is a friend of mine. Wes is the founder of Unpack'd, which is a consumer packaged goods brand and packaging design business based here in Austin. I got introduced to Wes several years ago through some kind of mutual projects, mutual customers that we had worked on together, and we had some friends in common. Have gotten to know him a little bit outside of a business context, really admire his integrity, his willingness to be open and honest about the things that he struggles with, to be honest about his faith and how that's intertwined with his business and his approach to customers. We talk about that quite a bit in this episode. We talk about Wes's family life. We talk about what the world was like for him during the COVID era. We talk a lot about what makes a good customer, what makes a bad customer, how to identify those before you get entrenched with one. As we always do, we cover the landscape of topics. So with all that said, I hope you'll enjoy this very wide-ranging conversation with Wes Woodell.
Yeah.
Something to do constructive.
Yeah, and you're about to go crazy, so you need something to kind of reset your mind.
Yeah, man. What was that time like for you? We met after the COVID era.
Yeah. Man, that's a question that goes right into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a rough year. That's when I found out I had a thyroid problem.
Like Hashimoto's?
Hypothyroidism.
Hypo.
Yeah. So basically the way I got that was the way your body deals with stress and anxiety is you release adrenaline to handle that. But if you're dealing with stress over like a very long, consistent period of time, you're just draining your adrenal glands over and over and over again until you can finally like screw up your thyroid system. So It made perfect sense, like looking back at it. In hindsight, it was like 2020 was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
When in 2020?
Just 2020 in general, like running a business at that time, I think for everybody was difficult unless you were selling speedboats or something that was like an obscure like hockey stick industry. That,
RVs.
Like no one ever thought. Yeah, like who would have thought that would happen?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like kind of realized what people you're working with that have character and which ones don't real fast when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
And so dealt with some unethical stuff during that year. But prior to that, so our first home purchase was a duplex. Great investment, like we still own it.
This is you and your wife?
Yeah, but it was pretty rough street. Like I got a lot of stories from living over there. But kind of the climax of that was we had a neighbor. I had to call the cops on him multiple times. Like would come home, he's beating his wife up in the front yard,
Holy
that sort
cow.
of stuff. Yeah. And you know, if I didn't have kids and stuff, then maybe I would have got involved. But it's like you don't want.
Yeah.
You got to keep some separation when they're right next door. But yeah, so like at one point, his wife finally said, "Hey, I'm leaving. I'm taking the kid." And he just happened to be like a 3-day meth binge when she told him this, which is probably not the best time to break that news to the guy. So he goes and gets a handgun and is opening fire on the neighbor's van. And yeah, we had like...
Not your van.
Not my van.
Other neighbor.
Other neighbor's van. And so we had like SWAT teams like barricading his door down, like walking behind vehicles on the street with guns drawn, like all sorts of stuff. Helicopters like spotlighting our backyard. And that's when my daughter was 1 year old. So that was like part of like kind of prior to 2020. And then even further back than that, our first year of marriage, we buried 4 people in a year. So like my mom, grandparent, my wife's grandmother, and then one of my best friends that was in my wedding and stuff. And so it was just like sustained stress for about 5 years straight. And it just basically screwed up my system. But
culminated in 2020.
Yeah. As like the silver lining on that stuff is like, it made me much more hyper aware of like balancing things in my own life.
Yeah.
And it also made me a lot more empathetic for people, business owners, who are going through high stress stuff, and then also the elderly, ironically, because like the thyroid threw off I basically went through like menopause very early.
What is that? What does the symptom profile look like for what you were going through?
Yeah, like trouble sleeping, which I still don't sleep great, but like is definitely worse than achy joints. But the biggest thing is like is just like drive. So I would like I conduct myself very professionally in the business world. So during 2020, I'd make it through the week, but like most people get to the end of the week and they're like, all right, I'm not going to worry about anything till Monday. Like, let's take a break. For me, I'd come home and I'd sit on the couch and I would just worry about Monday and didn't have the drive to get up, go play with my kids, go on a hike, go do things outdoors. And so we're going to get real personal here, but like I asked my thyroid doctor at one point, I was like, hey, what's the deal with sex drive and testosterone? Because like I haven't had a decrease in sex drive. And it was a light bulb moment for me, the way he described it. He's like, you got to think of it less as sex drive and more as drive in general. If I have a Catholic nun come in here, I'm not going to ask her how her sex life is. I'm going to ask her, like, what are the things that you used to love doing that you no longer have the drive to get up and go do anymore? And that was a light bulb moment for me. It was like all these things, like, I used to go outdoors, go on hikes, like all these things we used to do in prior years that I just didn't want to get off the couch for. Yeah. And so it's like if you think about like your stereotypical like elderly person, like my dad's in a condo in Florida with a bunch of old people, and it's like they're in this season of life where they have all this free time and they have more resources to go do things. They're in an amazing state, in Florida to go do stuff, and they don't leave their condo. Yeah. And that's why it's like
there's sort of an inverted graph as you get older.
Yeah.
Where your resource profile changes, and so do your priorities.
Yeah. So it's just stuff like that. So
how has your life changed since the COVID era happened? So like you have 2020, beginning of the year, February, March, you start to really realize, oh, there's something going on that's global. And then March, April hits, and now the world's locked down. Contrast that with today, we're September of 24. What is the last 4.5 years? How have you changed as a man, father, CEO, take your pick?
Yeah. That was a big catalyst in my life, obviously. So I think it helped me to rebalance things. I would say like prior to that, I had more of a mentality of like, just like tough it out. Yeah. Right. Like just work through it.
Grind.
And almost like this, like, functional sort of Gnosticism, if you know anything about like Gnosticism, like in like basically at the height of that, it was like this idea of like spiritualism is the ultimate truth, and like the body is like this like dead shell. And like I didn't intellectually believe that, but functionally speaking, it was like, yeah, I can just push through. I don't need to worry about my health. I just need to be kind of spiritually strong and mentally strong and work through these sorts of things. And now I definitely have a perception or a perspective where it's like my physical well-being is very intimately tied to my spiritual well-being, my mental well-being, and all those sorts of things.
Does it start there? Does it start with physical for you, or are they all just complementary of each other?
That's a good question.
It's probably different for different people. I'm just curious if you had to say it starts with X and then Y and Z become easier.
I think it's all like intertwined. Yeah. Now, like practically speaking, like what do I need to do in a certain circumstance, like to like start getting back to a healthier sort of place? It probably just depends on the circumstance. Like, sometimes it's like, hey, I'm gonna spend some time this morning just reading the Bible and getting into that, versus other times it's like I can try to read and I'm not going to get anything out of it because I'm not in the headspace to do that. Like I just need to go get smashed by some black belts in the jiu-jitsu gym, and then I'll get to a better place.
Then all of a sudden your spirit life is a little easier to tap into.
Yeah, release some adrenaline, release some dopamine, and then like that kind of brings me to more of a level place, and then I can think a little bit better, that sort of thing. So
how long have you trained jiu-jitsu?
About 2 years now.
What was the catalyst for that? Why did you decide to take that on?
Oh man, a handful of things. The biggest thing is my mental health. Like that's the driver that keeps me in it for sure, 100%. And like I don't think I'll ever stop doing it at this point.
Where do you train?
6 Blades.
6 Blades.
Yep. So Austin's become like the mecca of jiu-jitsu at this point, as you know.
Thanks, Gordon Ryan. And Rogan.
Honestly, thank you, COVID. Was like the best thing that happened to it. It happened to jiu-jitsu in Austin because...
Austin in general, right?
Yeah, because you had basically, it was Southern California, and then you had some like great gyms in New York, both of those states. You're talking about people running a business that relies on guys like being 2 inches from each other's face, breathing heavily.
Right.
So like that, their business got shut down overnight. If you're running a jiu-jitsu gym, and I don't think those guys are at like rolling in dough,
right?
Running a jiu-jitsu gym, right? So they all flooded to Austin, and it basically became a hotbed for Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, how many other industries is that the case for? Specifically that story. Like you couldn't operate in this state, or this state, doing what you do for a living, and all those people would rather operate than they would live in that state. So they go to a place where they can operate. And Austin was like top of the list for those industries. Comedy is that way for sure.
Yep.
Jiu-jitsu, really gyms, the fitness world in general. There was already a good foundation for those two things here. Maybe less so comedy than fitness.
Yeah.
But man, I mean, it's, Elon called it a boom town back in the day. I think it's still largely that.
Yep.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
For what you do for a living, this is a little bit of a left turn, but talk about what you do for a living. So if you're going to explain to somebody who doesn't know you or your business, Unpack'd, how do you explain it? Like, what's your elevator pitch?
Yeah.
What are you good at, Weston?
Yeah. We basically, so I have 2 businesses now. The one, basically what I've been doing for like 15 years now is building brands and packaging specifically. So like Unpack'd basically unpacks like the truths about who the brand is, like who the company is. A lot of times it's founders and that sort of stuff. And then unpacking who the consumer is. So we'll do consumer research, like focus groups, surveys, like things like that, quant, finding the connection between those two things, and then using heuristics or semiotics. So heuristics is like how human beings make decisions. And semiotics is, the meaning behind symbols and things like that. And so taking like color, typography, packaging form, all those sorts of things to target like an emotional state or a psychographic that can then drive trial for a product in CPG specifically.
So this is not just, I have a product, I find a designer who can make fonts and colors look good together on that package, and boom, I've got my package design.
No, it like gets into a little bit more like consumer psychology than that, right?
You may have clients that you don't want to name specifically, which I would understand. The first awareness I had of you was at your time with On It.
Yep. There's still a client of ours too.
Still a client?
Yep. Different scope now. It looks a little different than when we originally came in.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah,
Unilever changes the scope of those engagements quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we like made some big movements in partnership with them, obviously.
Yeah.
It was a collaboration, but the beginning was much more like fixing big problems, and now it's helping them maintain some healthy practices on their packaging.
So when that happened, I didn't know you at the time, and I don't think we got introduced until much later. But that was my first like awareness that what you do for a living even was a thing. Like now in hindsight, I recognize like, yeah, every little detail matters, particularly in consumer packaged goods. But what I remember was there were some people there on the executive team that I had respect for, who talked about this package redesign project that had instant like return on that investment.
Yep.
and it was something they had raved about. So can you talk about, maybe not that specific scenario, but what's a very obvious win you've had where you took a product that already existed and did a redesign and ended up with something where it was like direct correlation? We spent this, we did this project, and this is what it resulted in.
Yeah. I actually, for better and for worse, I actually don't go into like the quantifiable business ROI sort of stuff on projects, because I feel like it sets a precedent of like, hire us and you'll see your sales increase by X amount.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
All right, so that's your disclaimer.
Yeah, we are like one.
Not all results will apply to future projects.
We're one factor, right? Like you can
point.
like if you have someone who's a veteran who's exited 5 CPG companies and you plug in, like, yeah, you're gonna see those results. You have somebody else that is new, maybe they don't have the business acumen. Like there's been folks who don't know how to balance a P&L. It's like no amount of good branding is going to help if you don't have the business fundamentals, right?
Right.
So I don't like go into like, oh yeah, we saw this, but like there's definitely the data that I've seen of like, yeah, that it was very impactful.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think it's unique to every single project or rebrand that we work on, as far as the problems we're solving and the solutions we're coming up with. But oftentimes, because we're working with CPG startups at a very like a wide scale, right? Like on the small end, like there's like a Credo Foods is one of the brands that we rebranded years ago. They were in like 3 People's Pharmacies at the time. So like very small as far as the number of accounts, and it was like getting them ready to scale up to be able to go nationwide. On the larger end, like a Onnit Labs or a Charlotte's Web, that's like approaching an exit or approaching an IPO. Vital Farms is another one. But the thing that all those have in common is that they're startups, right? So you don't have 150 years of Coca-Cola brand equity to work with. Oftentimes, marketing budgets are very limited, which is why I'm so gung-ho on packaging. Is aside from the liquid in the bottle or the whatever's in the packaging itself, like I think that's the most important thing to actually move the needle. It's your biggest billboard on shelf. A little controversial to say, some people might disagree with me on this, but I actually think that the packaging changes what consumers taste. Like the cognitive dissonance sort of conversation of like, you're telling them before they ever put that bottle to their lips what to expect, right?
Yeah.
And that was something with like Credo specifically, was like, if we go down this sort of vegan road, make it look like clean white packaging with some leaves and things, like it's a vegan queso. A consumer is going to come to that and already be expecting it to not taste good.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you're baking that perception in before they've even put it in their mouth.
Yeah. And so for that, it was all about like, we want to cue like this idea of like gluttony and indulgence. Now the product's still clean. It's not a gluttonous product. It's a great product. But we want people to like, at the end of the day, someone who eats that, what they really want is real queso and a margarita with a floater on top, right? And so that's sort of the emotion, that psychographic that we wanted to target, was that sort of idea to overcome that barrier of what am I giving up by eating a vegan queso?
You kind of want the vegan element of it to be an afterthought.
Exactly.
It's like a bonus.
Exactly.
This is really good queso. Oh, and it's vegan. That's cool.
Yeah. So oftentimes, like I'd say in general, like 2 of the kind of biggest problems that we're often solving are, how do you drive trial in a category that's very saturated? So think like alcoholic spirits or the beer space or the supplement space. Queso's less crowded. Definitely less crowded. But how do you break through when there's like 1,000 options, right? Black Rifle Coffee Company, not one of our clients, but they did a great job of that by going deeper than just the product. I mean, it's coffee at the end of the day. There's nothing different about coffee. But everybody else was talking about, where they source their beans from and that sort of stuff. And these guys were like, hey, fuel to blow shit up, or like, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
And so how do you break through in a saturated category? The other thing that we often solve the problem for is how do you create a new category that doesn't exist? And so like that was Vital Farms was one of those examples. Charlotte's Web, a lot of examples of that. And then sometimes you have both of those problems at the same time.
Right.
Which is fun.
It's saturated, but you want to create a new category because the product is that unique.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. What lessons can be learned? So we work with a lot of CPG businesses, and I haven't really looked in hindsight as to why we've built such a dense CPG portfolio of clients. I really think it has to do with the personalities that are there, because fundamentally, Live Oak, my business is a customer service business. And when you're the person providing the service, the person that you're providing service to really affects whether or not that's a good customer.
Yep.
We're dealing with that right now, where we've got some customers where there's a personality dynamic there with our point of contact, or there's a culture there with that company that make it very difficult for us to want to continue providing customer service.
Yep.
But if you look at the lessons that you've learned in building a CPG product, look, feel, taste, touch, all those things, what lessons does a business like mine pull out of those things for how to market ourselves to the industry or to the marketplace?
To market your business?
Yeah. How do we learn lessons from CPG that make us better at marketing what we do for a living?
Oh man.
Think on that one.
Yeah, they're so different. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. I'll want to pick your brain on that, because this is topical for where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And I would respect your opinion on it.
Yep.
Because I do think there are through lines there. The personalities at CPG businesses are markedly different than the personalities, say, like at a law firm.
I think I could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, talk to that.
I think it's a lot more personal for CPG founders than founders of other industries. Which is, it's a double-edged sword. It's a catch-22, right? It's like, that's the reason I love it too.
Yeah.
Is there's a lot more passion for what they're doing. And at the end of the day, there's a product that you get to hold in your hand.
Right.
Which, like, just being able to touch something is more personal than like some theoretical sort of
IT service business. Yeah.
You said it, not me.
Yeah. I know what I am.
So I think that's probably a factor when it comes to there being more of a challenge in working with those types of clients in that industry. And also the joy of working with them too at the same time. But it takes a lot of back to the beginning of our conversation, like being empathetic of people, understanding their perspective and being able to collaborate versus like, if you come, this is like what I tell my team all the time. It's like, we're going to have our success when our clients have their success, right? Like if you come into it thinking like we're the hero of the story, like when there's that much passion involved, it's just not going to go well.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes the passion of all these creatives, including myself, versus the passion of the CPG founder. And if those things don't perfectly line up from day one, then you're going to have a hard road.
Yeah. Because you're arguing over foundational things at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think being in a open sort of partnership where it's like there's some give and take to get to where we're aligned is really, really important.
Yeah. That's the through line then.
Yeah. Honestly, I think getting good creative work is less about being really good at design. I've seen some of the best designers that have, most every designer has some stuff in his portfolio that he doesn't want anybody to see.
Right.
And so it's less about does that person have the talent, and it's more about can you communicate and work with a client in a way that allows you to actually get good work out there that you're proud of, that the client's proud of, and that actually works for their business and helps them succeed, not just like an art piece. Like if somebody is walking down the aisle and they see our work and they go, wow, that's beautiful, and then they walk off and buy a competitor product. Like,
right.
That's a fail. That's not a win. It doesn't matter how beautiful it is.
Yeah, that would be the through line then between our industries, would be that for us, the easy conventional way to look at IT service is you call this company, you log a ticket, somebody gets into your computer, they fix the issue, they close the ticket, and that's it.
Yep.
If that's all it took to be successful, every IT person ever in the history of technology would be successful at running an IT business.
Yep.
It's such a small percentage of what turns a client into a successful client relationship. The actual opening and closing of tickets and planning for projects and that sort of thing is almost trivial.
Yep.
The manner in which you communicate with that client and set expectations and make sure that they understand what success is going to look like when it's achieved. So it's not this just nebulous thing that changes with every issue that comes up. Yeah, it's very similar to what you do.
For sure.
That's cool. How much time do you spend with a client before you actually produce a thing for them to consider, like a mock-up?
Yeah, it depends on the client. So, oftentimes, if I won't name any names, but I have one client he has founded, probably like 10 or more CPG companies. And he's got a very good head on his shoulders as far as where he needs to go with the brand, right? Anytime we're starting a new project together. And he has he might have a partner on it and then maybe one other person that's a stakeholder. With somebody like that, we can get through the strategy piece pretty efficiently. Both because his stuff may not be backed by we did 3, consumer focus groups, yada, yada, but it's backed by, he's been doing it for 20 years. He knows what the trends are. He knows where the opportunities are. He's seen some stuff. And so just downloading his knowledge can help us kind of get to the strategy piece and then get into the creative design piece quicker.
Yeah.
Versus, if we have a client that has a whole group of investors and board members that are all going to have a say in it, and they're disagreeing and butting heads, and they all have their own opinions. The amount of upfront work there to make sure that the design is a success needs to be more intensive.
Right.
And so that's where it's okay, we're going to do in-depth interviews with everybody that's involved here. We're going to interview folks that are working in your organization, more like boots on the ground folks. We did this with a cannabis client where we interviewed them. We also went and interviewed bud tenders as well. We looked at IRI data.
What is IRI data?
It's like the Sorry. We looked at the BDSA data, which is the IRI, sales data, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
BDSA is specific to cannabis. And so
Gotcha.
Basically, when we get into these conversations around, why did you choose that color? It's less about, because we think that color is right.
It's pretty.
Yeah, because that's the right color and we're the designers, so shut up and listen to us.
Right.
And it's here's the psychology of that color. Here's how that color stands out in the landscape, in a dispensary, and this all lines up with everything that we've sort of pulled out of you guys holistically, but also as we looked at the BDSA data, this all lines up with where the industry and the category is going, right? And so we're actually leading you in a direction where it's football season and we're Texans, so got to use a football analogy. It's you throw the ball where the receiver's running to, not where he's at, right?
Right, yeah.
But that becomes an objective conversation when you have data and you have all this information on the front end versus, we're just going to jump straight into design.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a subjective battle of I like blue. Well, I like purple. Well, who's right?
Right. Do you ever see that when you start getting that deep in the weeds of the data behind decisions, does it ever influence the strategic direction of that business or that product altogether?
For sure.
Companies will just completely shift how they're marketing that product based on the stuff that you found?
For sure. I can finally talk about this one, Credo again. So we didn't do a whole lot of research on that one, as far as consumer research. We didn't do focus groups or anything like that. It was a pretty light scope. But one of the things that we helped them understand was, so Adam and Maddie are vegans, And they already had this kind of baked into their ethos. They just didn't realize it until we kind of started talking through it with them. They were already personally trying to help their like family and friends eat more plants. And what we did was help connect the dots for them of, hey, if you position this product as vegan, going after vegans, you're going to capture 1% of the sales demographic that you would capture by positioning it as plant-based. And this is right when plant-based was becoming like the thing. And so, okay, your opportunity there from a sales demographic is now 100 times what it would have been. What's fun about this is it actually shifted not only where we took the positioning and the branding, but completely redefined what they had in mind from a product innovation standpoint. So had they gone down this road of like vegan sort of positioning, still a vegan product, but that's not how we positioned it. Had they gone down this road of positioning it as a vegan product, they'd probably have been doing like, oh, let's do some clean rice bowls, like ready to eat sort of stuff. Instead, they just launched a product that we've been dreaming up like since the very early days of working with them, which is canned cheese, but a dairy-free version of it, right? So it's like, and the product is awesome too.
What is the form factor of a canned cheese? Like a tuna can?
Like, no, like the Cheese Whiz.
Oh.
You know, like the easy cheese like you had when you were a kid?
Yeah. I get
yeah,
it.
it's like the nostalgic sort of stuff.
Yeah, for Triscuits.
Yeah, and the product is like spot on, man. Cause like
Really? Canned cheeses is a thing I didn't realize that it had left my life, but that at a certain point in my life I really was fond of.
yeah,
I'm gonna have to go figure that. Where do they sell that?
I think they're at HEB now.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but like the flavor and texture and everything is spot on with that because canned cheese was never natural to begin with. Like,
Right.
It was never actually like, it was always like, you know.
You never had canned cheese included in your charcuterie board.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it in the charcuterie often.
No, it's great for football days. Though,
It is, yeah. I guess the canned cheese was sort of the entry point to charcuterie. It's kind of the kids' version of charcuterie.
Yeah.
Cheese and crackers.
Yeah, at least in Baytown, Texas, where I grew up, it was.
Same for Manor, Texas, where I grew up. Talk about, you don't have to name customers specifically, you wouldn't want to, but you ever fired a customer?
Yes, I'm getting, that's a hard thing for me to do.
Yeah.
I'm naturally a peacemaker, and I will do everything I can to reconcile the relationship.
Yeah.
And to the point of like hurting my organization at times, and that's something I'm working on getting better at. The ideal is to sniff them out before it ever happens, but it's never been an instance of bad work. It's always been an instance of someone trying to take advantage of us.
Mm-hmm. For us to suss out what a good client looks like, or more importantly, what a bad client looks like prior to ever even going through the sales cycle with them, like ideally you would identify, okay, this customer has interest in IT service. You would have an intro meeting with them where you tell them a little bit about your business, and then you would have information gathering meetings so we could actually give them a proposal. Sometime between intro meeting and the first information gathering meeting, you should have a pretty good sense of, man, I don't know, this is one we want to work with.
Yep.
And I think what we found is in our intro meeting, we have a point of talking about what a really good customer looks like.
Yep.
And oftentimes we get questions from that prospect, well, what does a bad customer look like? Like you hope they draw the conclusion of if this is a good customer, well, and the opposite of that looks like a bad customer. We try to not lead with the bad piece of it, but you know, customers that really want to be hugely involved in the IT strategy, they like to fiddle with IT stuff, may not be a good client for us.
Yeah.
Because they have opinions on the way they'd like to see things done, and we have opinions based on 10 years of doing it for 100 plus companies. So in your world, is client involvement, how involved do you want a client to be? And is there such thing as a client that just is over-involved, too opinionated?
I want them very involved, but I want their 2 cents to be driven by our strategy and by the facts.
By data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they should expect us to be very objective in our decision making, even though we're working in a subjective space.
Right.
And that's what makes it challenging is, at the end of the day, it's always subjective to some degree. at the same time, I want them to be objective in their decision making.
Yeah,
and that's
so your
why,
job is then to give them the data that you're seeing.
yeah. And I will own if there's a gap, that's on me to figure out how to show them why they're wrong.
Yeah.
And similar, it's on me to be humble enough to say, oh, actually, yeah, we are biased because we spent 10 times as much effort on this one concept than the other concepts, which has created a bias in us towards this one. The same way a client can come into a project and have a bias because they've been dreaming about this one thing for 2 years straight.
Right.
And if you show them anything else, regardless of the data, they're going to have a hard time parting with that. Or it's like a brand element that that they've grown attached to. So we had a client, great guy, awesome client, and I like personally a really good guy, but he loved his logo, and I'm trying to think of I'll just say it. It's like it's a mushroom supplement company.
Okay.
He loved his logo. The whole strategy was, hey, like, if you position this as psychedelic, you're causing problems. Like, people are not going to understand that it's not a psychedelic mushroom company. It's a functional mushroom company. You're also scaring people from trying it.
Right.
We want to get moms that are like tired of big pharma who now want something more natural to become our clients versus being like going after like the mush heads, like the types of folks that could like go out into the forest and pick their own mushrooms and not kill themselves, which I would totally kill myself.
Right, me too.
And so everyone aligned on that. We get into the process and like could not disconnect from his logo. It's on me to figure out how do I help him see that his logo is not the best fit for him, for his goals. And so what we ended up doing, and we'd never done this before, but we ended up creating this like spectrum that showed all of his competitors' logos on a spectrum from psychedelic to like mass approachable sort of positioning. And then we plopped his old logo and the new logos on there, and guess where the old logo fell? It was like number 2, number 3 on the psychedelic side. And so it's like sometimes it's just figuring out like, man, how do I show this?
Right.
Versus like you can say it all day, but like if you can show them why it's the best decision for them, that can go a long, long ways.
Is it part of your initial questions to a client, like where are the sacred cows? What are the things here that we can't mess with?
For sure. Yeah.
And are there answers to that question that would be red flags for you?
Yeah, I mean, if it's just completely unstrategic, like if I know it's going to fail from a business standpoint, that's a red flag. And if they can't get to the point of like understanding that that's not going to help their business, then we might not be the best fit for them. Yeah.
You have a unique challenge in what you do, in that the product that you produce for a client has an artistic element to it. You and your group are the artist, and you're delivering something to the client that you want them to be fond of. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, there's times where you have to realize, no, I'm actually the one that's married to this, and maybe it's not a good decision.
Yep.
For what we do, there's no artistic element to it. Like what we produce is based on experience working with clients that are similar to this client. So we're probably less likely to get married to our approach because we put artistic creativity into it. How hard is that for you to separate, like the creative element that wants his art to be liked versus the business element which doesn't care about it as long as the market likes it?
I think that's the fun of the challenge. Is how do I get all these things to work harmoniously?
Yeah.
I'm a perfectionist, and like I said, I'm a peacemaker. So it's like if I can bring harmony even into the design, so that it's both strategic, it makes the client happy, and we're proud of it.
Yeah.
Like that's the objective every single time we do a project.
That's the secret sauce.
There is no project that I can think of at this point as far as rebrands. I'm sure there's like sell sheets and stuff we've done that I don't want anybody to see, but like that's also like it's not in the client's interest to put 50 hours into a sell sheet.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
But from a rebrand standpoint, there's nothing that I like don't want people to see.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's probably more on my team patting their back than mine. Like, just we've done a great job. And Yeah.
Are you an artist in your own like personal life? Do you consider yourself an artist?
That's my background. I grew up artistic. I don't have hobbies that are art related.
Okay. What did you have as a hobby, art related hobby when you were younger?
Like drawing, painting, sculpture, all those sorts of things. So all that stuff kind of came naturally to me.
Yeah.
It got me out of my hometown. It got me to UT. And then, you know, towards the end of college, I sobered up and realized I should probably figure out like what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah. You went to school for design?
I went to school for arts. I was in fine arts.
Okay.
This is one of those things where it's like I can't take credit for it. It's like definitely a God thing. I like wrote my essay and applied to the design program, which was really competitive at UT, like the night before, and got in. I remember arguing with my dad and like when I came home from college one time, and I was like, "Why the hell did you let me go into fine arts? I'm gonna be poor the rest of my life."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, you just gotta trust God. He's got a plan for you." I was like, "Yo, you don't know what you're talking about. You should have made me go to business school, man." But yeah, I mean, it worked out. I appreciate the program a lot more on this side of things that I went through. Yeah, I mean, things just kind of fell into the right place.
You think there will be a period in your life where you go back to drawing, painting, sculpting just for the sake of the art form? Or has your avocation and vocation combined to the point now where any design work you're doing is just going to feel like work?
Yeah. The closest I've gotten is on like trips where I completely unplug from work. There's been times where I've sketched things that like I've been processing through from like a spiritual standpoint or like a philosophical standpoint. Like, hey, how can I put this into an image that I can kind of like meditate on or whatever? But aside from that, I have no desire to go back to any of that. Maybe I would like, my oldest daughter is really interested in art, and like, I had her take a private lesson with a really talented artist in town that does some work for us sometimes, throwing pottery.
Oh, that's cool.
I could maybe like get to a point of like throwing some pottery or turning wood or something like that on a lathe. That's a little bit more mindless, but anything that's like, at this point, any kind of art that's like super detail oriented, very time consuming, I wouldn't get into. Maybe when I retire, if I had just too much time on my hands, I could get back into woodworking. I did some stuff in college, like getting into like Japanese joinery and stuff like that, like hand carpentry type of stuff.
Right. This is that equation when it crosses, and now all of a sudden your time is not at so much of a premium.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot for myself too. You've mentioned a couple of times, you've sort of touched around your faith. You're a man of faith.
Yep.
I've had a couple of people in here that this topic has come up, and I'm interested to hear where you fall on it. And I didn't prepare you for this one, so good luck.
Fire away.
How much should a person of faith position their business as a Christian-owned business or Muslim-owned business, or whatever the faith background is? How much should they advertise that as part of the business, or should they not at all?
I think there's two answers to that. Like, one is what, personally for me, what it's been, and then the other is just kind of like high level. I'll start high level and then remind me to come back to the personal piece. I'm very, very cautious not to prescribe this is how you do your faith to anyone. In Christianity, like if you read the Bible, it talks a lot about like the Holy Spirit, to the point where like Jesus spends years with these guys he's discipling or mentoring, to use a non-Christianese word. And the last thing he tells them is like, don't do anything. Like, I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit, and then you follow him. Like, he's going to tell you what to do. And so I've seen people get into trouble because they've been convicted or led by God to do something, and then they go, this is how you do it, and then they say everybody's got to do it this way, and that's like, I think that's a very, very dangerous place to be. So I'm very cautious not to be like, you shouldn't put Christianity on the name of your business, because maybe God is leading someone to do that. That said, there's a lot of hypocrisy out there, and even like nonprofits at times do things that are unethical. And so like, yeah, you're not just tarnishing your name when you do that, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the caution of that, but also the freedom of, ultimately it doesn't matter what anyone else says. If God tells you to do something, you should,
Right.
obey that. So there's the flexibility to do that, but you shouldn't just march on into like, I'm going to slap Jesus' name on something without being very, very, very prayerful about that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then we could go into a whole conversation around cultural context and that sort of stuff, and like wisdom and discernment around that. I think for me personally, I just strive for authenticity. There's been times, even outside of business, where I've forced the sharing of my faith because I was actually insecure about my own beliefs at the time. And so it became like a works righteousness, which is opposed to everything in Christianity, where I'm actually trying to share this so I can affirm for myself something or earn my righteousness by being a good Christian and sharing something. It's just totally inauthentic when you're doing that, right? And then there's other times where I've been thinking about this a lot lately with certain groups of people that I'm in my network, where I shy away from being true to who I am. And that's inauthentic as well. So like, you can be inauthentic in sharing, and you can be inauthentic in not sharing your faith. For me, in business specifically, I think most people know that I'm a follower of Jesus. I hope so, but I think that in business specifically, in our cultural context, I think for me, it has started with my actions. And then over time, people will see more and more of like what's behind those actions, what they're rooted in. I've even had someone who, a work colleague and friend, who shared with me at one point, like, yeah, if you would have come in guns a-blazing with your faith, like one, I wouldn't have listened to what you're saying at all, and two, we probably wouldn't be doing business together, right?
Right. It's the guns a-blazing thing that turns people off no matter what the topic is, no matter what the subject matter is.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, people need to listen a lot more than they speak, I think.
What would you tell a business owner who has, let's say, a plumbing business with a bunch of fleet of trucks, and it's Christian owned since 2009 with, crosses and Christian symbolism on their trucks? Would you advise a rebrand?
Man, I'd probably ask them a lot of questions about like what led to that. Were they prayerful? Did they seek discernment from people who know them well, who are both believers and followers of Jesus as well, and then people that were also have a solid business acumen and could advise on those sorts of things? Ideally, you get someone who overlaps with both work and faith to speak into that. Like, that's something I've really struggled to find in my career, and recently have found guys to speak into that stuff. And then I'd even get into scalability. And what does this mean? You're only hiring Christians? And then what does that say about your faith, that you're only hiring Christians? That's actually a bad thing, in my opinion.
Right.
If you're scaling to a certain point, are you going to be able to maintain quality that glorifies God and actually owns up to what you're putting on the side of your truck? I think there's a lot of factors there, for sure.
Yeah.
And then what are your ultimate goals? Like, is it? Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. What's the goal of putting it on the truck to begin with?
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, in our cultural context, I think you're probably making business a lot harder on yourself at this point by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a little counterintuitiveness to that.
Yeah. Generations past, you probably close more deals or whatever, get more business by doing that. Like now I think you're actually, again, this is getting into my personal, where I've landed on it. It could be different for anyone else, for someone else, but I feel like I've actually, if I were to do that, I would actually be putting a barrier or a speed bump in the way of both business and actually sharing my faith.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with you being genuine, right? If you're not that person outside of a business context, to fake like you're that person in a business context is going to come across as ingenuine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also someone I don't put a Jesus bumper sticker or anything like that on my car because like I know I don't have the discipline to not use profanity
to make that look bad.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly right.
I'm not going to represent Jesus very well in this situation.
I have the pastor of the church that we go to is a young guy, and I've gotten to know him decently well, and we've talked about this topic specifically a couple of times, and I think, I don't know, I need to get him in here to have this conversation on camera, but I think we may disagree on this, Phil and I, and I heard a quote, and I need to figure out who the attribution is, but that you should
Francis of Assisi.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
It might be, but it's that at all times and all things, this is paraphrasing, you should be spreading the gospel, but only when absolutely necessary should you be using words.
Francis
is that who it is?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll tell you the way I remember that. An old pastor at my old church at one point, he said, and he said this because he was a sissy. was the way he phrased
I get the
it.
pun.
And like, 10, 15 years ago, I would have agreed with that. Like, you should be more bold, be braver or whatever.
Yeah.
I've come to a place where it's like, no, actually, in the business context, I think it's actually probably more, he's probably more right. Like, lead with your actions. But to use that, there's a scripture that says, always be prepared to like share the reason for the hope you have.
Yeah.
And so like, being able to say, well, like when someone's like, well, why would you do that in business? Like, why did you show that person grace when they like don't deserve it? Obviously, being able to point to Jesus and say, well, I believe that God's shown me infinite grace.
Yeah. And
so that my job is to love others because I've been loved by Him. But yeah, that's kind of where I've landed on it.
For somebody that's had anxiety in the past, there'd be no shortage of evidence for you to find things to be pessimistic about in 2024 America. To the extent at which you are optimistic, what reason do you have to be optimistic?
I'm a massive pessimist. This is like the worst question to ask me. But I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with a lot of optimists, which I think helps balance me out. But I think my pessimism is good in some senses. Like I'm always thinking about the worst case scenario, which I think is part of what you have to do in business, but it's also bad because you
can manifest it.
It can weigh you down big time for sure. I think oh man, this is like about to turn into a counseling session more than anything.
Good.
I think the optimism comes from what I've seen Jesus do in my life and in the lives of people around me, more than anything else. And then the past year or so, just like I have bad theology that I didn't realize I had. That's actually rooted in some good theology, oddly. It's not just about truths, but it's about how do you balance, what's the right ratio of these truths, right? And so in my faith, I was raised basically the prosperity gospel is a massive lie, which it is. It's not you don't start following Jesus and then he makes everybody rich and healthy and that sort of stuff. That's a very dangerous thing that some people believe that I think it can get you in trouble real fast if you think that that's what following God is about, is just being blessed in a worldly sense. And And so, but that's kind of like where I've spent most of my, even before I was a follower of Jesus, like my understanding of Christianity, when I thought I was a follower of Jesus, was like still around this sort of idea of like prosperity gospel is bad. You know, ultimately God is about his glory and our good comes from his glory, even if we only see that after this life is over. And all those things are true. But I took that to such an extreme that it was almost like, oh, things are going well, like what's going to happen? Like when it, like, you know, God's going to get more glory when there's a martyrdom that happens, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just like waiting to get martyred sort of approach, like not in the literal sense, obviously, but like something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it just it neglects giving the appropriate weight, in my opinion, in my life, to just this idea of like God as a good father who gives good gifts to his children. Like I get my girls things because I love them, and I get joy out of giving gifts to my girls, or taking them on trips, or going to get ice cream or snow cones, things like that. It doesn't always have to be, you know, there's not some like ulterior motive for me to do that. And there's an aspect of God as a good father like that. Now there's times where it's like, yeah, I would like to give them more treats, but that's not good for them. Like, you can't just eat straight sugar all day long, right? And like there's been areas of that too where like God hasn't blessed the businesses in ways that I want, because he knows like that's dangerous for Wes. So I think that's an aspect of it for sure. And yeah, just seeing some of the things, like specifically with men that I'm friends with, how God's changed their life in like ways that are just like supernatural. Like this is not normal. Like this doesn't just happen type of stuff.
You've talked a little bit about like the friend groups. You've talked a little bit about mentors you've had. I'm using that word. You didn't use that word, but talk about the importance of a mentor relationship, either with you as the mentor or having a mentor, and then what that's taught you about yourself and where you need to be growing professionally.
Yeah.
Do you have mentors?
I do.
Do they know they are your mentor? Have you talked
They've
about
been
that
mentors
explicitly?
in a formal sense, and then also in an informal sense.
Okay. Do you mentor anybody?
I do. In a season in the church world, I've mentored people in a formal sense. And in like probably the past like 5 or more years, it's been all informal, both in the church side of my life and in the business side of my life, I'd say. So like in business, mentoring is a lot of just like being a good leader at Unpack'd, to be honest. Both from the standpoint of people's craft, helping them hone in on how to be a good designer, good illustrator, things like that. I try to be pretty open and authentic about struggles and challenges and how I handle those sorts of things in business, ethics and stuff like that with my team. To a fault sometimes. Like there's definitely been times where I've shared too much. Like they probably don't need to know that about the business. But so I think that's what it's looked like informally. Definitely like with clients, I mean, there's always an aspect of like helping to show them how to think about branding and stuff like that. So there's a mentorship type of thing there. And then outside of that, this is kind of back to your question, like my faith is more implicit in the business side of things, and it's more explicit outside of that. So the most recent mentorship, I'm really proud of this guy, is a neighbor of mine who, to say he got dealt a bad hand growing up would be a gross understatement. To the point where I don't, apart from God doing something, which is exactly what happened with him, I would not be able to turn my life around if I was dealt that hand. Spent a lot of time incarcerated, some very serious drug addiction stuff, and pretty violent guy as well. And I was fortunate, and also it's hard to get to become really good friends with him. And they walked through some stuff with him that I won't share here, because it's his story, but that was very difficult and even dangerous for me at times. And recently got to see him like commit his life to Jesus and like lay that down, and it's been a 180 in his life, and getting to see a lot of restoration of things. And so it was just like, that basically just looked like grabbing coffee with the guy and hanging out and talking, even in really difficult situations that he was in, self-imposed sort of stuff. But, and now it's like, he's mentoring me now. Like, I get updates every morning from him via text message of like what he's grateful for. And I'm like, I read that and I'm like, damn, and I'm sitting here bitching and moaning about like my tidy, nice little life,
Yeah.
Comparing myself to business owners and entrepreneurs that are more successful than me, and thinking like, oh, I'm, woe is me. And this guy's like getting things back on track, and he's extremely grateful, and optimistic. So it's really convicting for me to see that.
Yeah, it's cool. That's, it's not present in every mentor-mentee relationship, but oftentimes what you think is a one-way relationship ends up being reciprocal, where somebody that's mentoring you is actually getting some mentorship out of that relationship too. So
yeah, I mean, if you're not getting anything out of it, then you're probably not. You probably got like an ego or pride thing that needs to be dealt with.
Right. Exactly. Wes, thanks for being open to doing this, man.
Yeah.
I called you Weston earlier. I like using full names. Does anybody call you Weston by your full name?
No, I tried to make the switch back to Weston at one point.
Oh, really?
And I always forgot to introduce myself as Weston.
Wes is easier.
It's Wes.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. I'll
Yeah, dude.
like to do it again.
Sounds good.
Thanks for making time for me.
Yeah. Likewise.